Cassandra Wheeler stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her auburn hair catching the soft morning light filtering through the window. Her green eyes, once filled with resignation, now sparkled with something she thought she had lost forever: hope. She traced her fingertips along the edge of the sink, a gentle smile playing on her lips, as she remembered how, just 7 years ago, she had stood in this same spot, tears streaming down her face, swearing she would never let anyone close enough to hurt her again. Her first marriage had ended badly, not with screaming matches or thrown plates, but with something far worse: a slow, agonizing fade into indifference. By the time the divorce papers were signed, she had felt like a ghost in her own life. She was 30 years old then, and she had made a promise to herself that day. She would build a life alone, a life where her happiness did not depend on anyone else. For 7 years, she had kept that promise. She had thrived, actually, built a career she was proud of, traveled to places she had only dreamed about, created a circle of friends who filled her days with laughter. She had convinced herself that contentment was enough, that the fairy tale of finding the one was just that, a fairy tale meant for other people. Then she met Julius Wheeler. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop she visited every week. She had been waiting for her usual order when a man's voice behind her said, "Excuse me, I think you dropped this." She turned to find a tall man with dark hair and warm brown eyes holding out her scarf. His smile was genuine, the kind that reached his eyes and made small crinkles appear at the corners. They talked for 20 minutes that felt like 20 seconds. He was articulate, funny in an understated way, and when he asked if he could see her again, something inside her chest, something she thought had calcified years ago, stirred to life. Their courtship was like nothing she had experienced before. Julius was attentive without being suffocating, romantic without being performative. He remembered small details she mentioned in passing, that she preferred daisies over roses, that she loved old black and white films, that rainy Sunday mornings were her favorite time of the week. On their third date, he took her to a vintage cinema showing Casablanca. On their fifth, he surprised her with a weekend trip to a cabin by a lake where they spent 2 days talking, laughing, and slowly dismantling the walls she had spent 7 years building. 6 months into their relationship, Julius proposed. It was not elaborate or public. He simply asked her one evening as they sat on her apartment balcony, the city lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars. "Cassandra," he said, taking her hand in his, "I know you've been hurt. I know you built a life where you don't need anyone. But I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that needing someone isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing we can do. Will you marry me?" She said yes, before her rational mind could intervene with all the reasons she should say no. They married in a small ceremony 4 months later. Nothing extravagant, just close friends, simple vows, and a reception in a garden where white lights hung from trees like captured fireflies. As Cassandra danced with Julius that night, her head resting against his chest, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in years: certainty. This was her person. This was her second chance. This was her happily ever after. The first 6 months of marriage were blissful. Julius would leave little notes in her purse for her to find during the day. They cooked together on weeknights, their kitchen filled with laughter and the smell of garlic and herbs. On weekends, they explored the city like tourists, finding hidden bookstores and hole-in-the-wall restaurants. He made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced, not just loved, but truly understood. Then, without warning, everything changed. It started subtly. Julius began coming home later from work, offering vague explanations about projects and deadlines. His usual warmth cooled to a polite distance. The notes stopped appearing in her purse. When she tried to initiate conversations, his responses were brief, distracted. He stopped meeting her eyes during dinner, pushing food around his plate while his mind seemed to be somewhere far away. At first, Cassandra told herself it was just stress. Everyone went through rough patches at work. But as days turned into a week, and then two, the distance between them grew into a chasm she could not cross. He stopped reaching for her hand when they walked. He stayed up late in his home office, the door closed, the light beneath it, a thin accusation in the darkness. When she asked if something was wrong, he would shake his head and say, "I'm fine, just tired." But his eyes told a different story, one of anguish and secrets. The worst part was the silence. Not the absence of words, but the absence of connection. They still shared a bed, but it felt like an ocean separated them. She would lie awake at night, listening to his breathing, wondering when her husband had become a stranger. The man who had made her believe in love again now seemed unreachable, trapped behind walls she could not scale. Cassandra's mind went to dark places during those 2 weeks. Was he having an affair? Had he realized he made a mistake marrying her? Was there someone else? Someone younger? More exciting? Less damaged by a failed first marriage? The thoughts consumed her. She found herself checking his phone when he showered, feeling both ashamed and desperate. She looked for signs: lipstick on his collar, unfamiliar perfume, unexplained receipts. She found nothing, which somehow made it worse. At least evidence would have been an answer. This uncertainty was torture. She started questioning everything. Had she misread their entire relationship? Had she been so desperate for love that she had invented a connection that was not really there? The doubts that plagued her first marriage came flooding back, except this time they were sharper, more vicious, because this time she had so much more to lose. She had given Julius something she swore she would never give anyone again: her complete and total trust. On the 15th day of his cold distance, Cassandra sat alone in their living room, tears streaming down her face, convinced that her second chance at love was crumbling just like the first. She thought about all the times she had told herself she was better off alone, and now those words felt like prophecy rather than protection. Maybe she was meant to be alone. Maybe some people just were not built for lasting love. Then, just as suddenly as the coldness had arrived, it vanished. Julius came home from work one evening with flowers, yellow daisies, her favorite. His eyes were bright again, alive with something she could not quite name. "I'm sorry," he said, pulling her into his arms before she could even process what was happening. "I've been distant, I know, but I'm here now. I'm really here." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, and for the first time in 2 weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. She wanted to demand answers, to ask where he had been emotionally, what had changed. But the relief of having him back was so overwhelming that she pushed her questions aside. Maybe it did not matter. Maybe what mattered was that the storm had passed. What followed was unlike anything Cassandra had ever experienced. For the next 2 months, Julius transformed into a version of himself that seemed almost too perfect to be real. He surprised her with weekend getaways to places she had always wanted to visit: a bed and breakfast in wine country, a coastal town where they watched the sunset from their hotel balcony, a mountain resort where they hiked during the day and stargazed at night. He planned elaborate date nights at restaurants she had only read about in magazines, places with months-long waiting lists that he somehow got them into. Every gesture felt grand, intentional, as if he were trying to pack a lifetime of romance into weeks. He bought her gifts, not expensive jewelry or designer handbags, but thoughtful things that showed he paid attention. A first edition of her favorite novel, a vintage record player with albums from artists she loved, a painting of a daisy field that now hung in their bedroom. At night, he held her like she might disappear if he let go. He whispered things like, "You're everything to me," and "I want you to remember this moment." At the time, she thought it was romantic. She felt cherished, adored, like she was living in a dream she never wanted to wake from. Her friends commented on how happy she looked, how Julius seemed like he had stepped out of a romance novel. But there was something underneath it all, something she could not quite name, an intensity that felt less like passion and more like desperation. The way he looked at her sometimes, not with love exactly, but with something that looked almost like grief. She brushed it off. Maybe he was just making up for those 2 difficult weeks. Maybe this was his way of apologizing for his distance. She chose to accept it at face value, to bask in the attention, to believe that this was simply what deep love looked like. 2 months into his transformation, on a sunny Saturday morning, Cassandra decided to organize Julius's home office. He had mentioned wanting to sort through some paperwork, and she thought she would surprise him by getting a head start. She was not snooping, at least that is what she told herself. She was just trying to be helpful, trying to be a good wife. She started with the desk drawers, sorting through old bills and receipts, creating piles for things to keep and things to shred. Julius had always been somewhat disorganized with paperwork, letting documents accumulate in haphazard stacks. As she worked through the second drawer, her hand brushed against a manila folder tucked beneath a stack of old tax returns. She pulled it out, expecting to find more financial records or perhaps warranty information for household appliances. Instead, she found a life insurance policy. Her hands trembled as she opened the folder. The policy was dated just 2 days ago, barely 48 hours old. The coverage amount made her breath catch in her throat. $2 million. $2 million on her life. Her name was printed clearly on the beneficiary line, but what made her blood run cold was the signature section. Both their names were signed, hers and his, except she had never signed this document. She had never even seen it before this moment. Cassandra stared at her own signature, rendered in ink that looked exactly like her handwriting, but that she had absolutely no memory of producing. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Then she saw it, clipped to the back of the policy. A power of attorney document she had signed months ago when they were setting up their joint bank accounts. Julius had explained it was standard procedure for married couples, a way to handle financial matters if one of them was unavailable. She had signed it without much thought, trusting him completely. He had used that power of attorney to sign a $2 million life insurance policy in her name without telling her. The folder slipped from her hands and scattered across the desk. Papers drifted to the floor like autumn leaves, but she could not move to pick them up. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The room seemed to tilt, and she gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. Her mind went to a place so dark, so terrifying, that she almost could not form the thought into words. Why would her husband secretly take out a massive life insurance policy on her life? The question echoed in her head, each repetition bringing with it a new wave of nauseating possibilities. The 2 weeks of cold distance, the 2 months of excessive romance and expensive trips, the way he looked at her sometimes like he was memorizing her face, the intensity with which he held her at night, as if she might vanish. It all suddenly took on a sinister quality, like a beautiful painting that reveals hidden horrors when viewed from a different angle. She thought about all the true crime documentaries she had watched over the years, stories of spouses who had murdered their partners for insurance money. She had always watched them with a kind of detached fascination, never imagining she could be living in one, but the pattern was there, undeniable and terrifying. The sudden increase in affection after a period of distance, the creation of perfect memories, the secret financial preparation. Cassandra's mind went to Julius, the man she had married, the man she had trusted with her broken heart, the man who had made her believe in love again. Could he really be planning to kill her? The thought seemed absurd, impossible. This was Julius, who cried during sad movies, who rescued spiders from the house instead of killing them, who had once driven 2 hours out of their way to return a wallet he found in a parking lot. How could that man be capable of murder? But people were not always what they seemed. Her first husband had not seemed like the type to fall out of love and abandon their marriage. Yet he had. She had spent 7 years learning to trust her instincts again, to believe in her own judgment. And right now, every instinct she had was screaming that something was very, very wrong. She left the office in a daze, the insurance policy still scattered across the desk. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes. The expensive gifts Julius had bought her, were they guilt purchases? The romantic trips, were they meant to create an alibi of a loving husband? The way he had been so insistent about taking photos everywhere they went, was he documenting their happiness for some future investigation? Cassandra found herself in their bedroom, staring at the painting of the daisy field he had given her. Daisies, her favorite flower. He knew everything about her, her preferences, her routines, her habits. He knew she trusted him completely. That made her the perfect victim. She sat on the edge of their bed, her mind spiraling. Should she confront him? Should she run? Should she call someone? A friend? A lawyer? The police? But what would she even say? My husband took out a life insurance policy on me? That was not illegal. Spouses did it all the time. She had no proof of any actual crime, just a terrible feeling in her gut, and a document that could have a dozen innocent explanations. Except she could not think of a single innocent explanation. The front door opened, and she heard Julius call out, "Cassandra, I'm home!" His voice was cheerful, warm, exactly as it had been for the past 2 months. She heard his footsteps moving through the apartment, coming toward the bedroom. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She stood up quickly, trying to compose her face into something normal, something that would not give away the fact that her entire world had just shattered. Julius appeared in the doorway, smiling. He was holding a bag from her favorite bakery. "I brought those lemon tarts you love," he said. Then his smile faltered. "Hey, are you okay? You look pale." She wanted to scream. She wanted to demand answers. She wanted to run. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'm fine. Just a headache." The lie came easily, automatically, a survival instinct kicking in. Do not let him know that you know. Not yet. Not until you have a plan. "Do you want some medicine? I can get you—" "No," she interrupted, perhaps too quickly. "No, I'm fine, really. Just need to lie down for a bit." Julius set the bakery bag on the dresser and moved toward her, concern etched on his face. When he reached out to touch her forehead, she flinched. She could not help it. The man she loved, or thought she loved, might be planning to murder her, and he was standing 2 feet away, looking at her with those warm brown eyes that had once made her feel safe. "You're sure you're okay?" he asked again. "Yes," she lied. "Just tired." He kissed her forehead gently, and she had to force herself not to recoil. "Get some rest," he said softly. "I'll make dinner tonight. Your favorite. Pasta with that cream sauce you like." As he left the room, Cassandra sank back onto the bed, her body shaking. She could hear him in the kitchen, humming as he unpacked groceries. The sound was so normal, so domestic, so utterly at odds with the terror coursing through her veins. How could he be humming while plotting her death? How could he buy her lemon tarts and plan her funeral? She spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog of fear and confusion. She tried to act normal during dinner, pushing pasta around her plate while Julius talked about his day at work. She watched his hands as he gestured, hands that had held her tenderly, hands that might be planning violence. She studied his face, searching for signs of deception, but found only the man she had fallen in love with. That night, lying in bed beside him, she stayed awake long after his breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her mind racing through scenarios. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation she had not considered. Maybe tomorrow she would wake up and realize she had overreacted, that her past trauma had made her paranoid. But as the hours crawled by and the darkness pressed in around her, she could not shake the feeling that she was sleeping next to a stranger. a dangerous stranger. The next morning, Julius was unusually cheerful at breakfast. "I have a surprise for you," he announced, his eyes bright with excitement. Cassandra's stomach clenched. "What kind of surprise?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "I've booked us an adventure," he said, grinning. "Something we've never done before, something incredible." "What is it?" She was not sure she wanted to know. "Skydiving," he said, watching her face carefully. "I've booked us a tandem jump for next Saturday. I know you mentioned once that you'd always wanted to try it, and I thought, why not? Life's too short not to take chances, right?" Life's too short. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning only she could hear. Skydiving, an activity where accidents happened, where parachutes sometimes failed, where someone could fall to their death, and it would be ruled a tragic accident. Cassandra's mouth went dry. She stared at her husband across the breakfast table, and for the first time since she had met him, she felt genuine fear. Not the fear of heartbreak or disappointment, but the primal fear of someone who realizes they might be in actual danger. "That sounds amazing," she heard herself say, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. "I can't wait." Julius reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It's going to be perfect," he said, "an experience we'll never forget." As Cassandra looked into his eyes, she thought, one of us definitely won't forget it. The question is, will I survive to remember? The next few days passed in a surreal haze. Julius was attentive and affectionate, planning every detail of their upcoming jump. He showed her videos of other couples skydiving, talked excitedly about the rush of freefall, described the view they would have from 12,000 feet. Each conversation felt like a layer of performance, a carefully constructed facade designed to make everything seem normal. Cassandra played her part, too. He smiled and nodded, and pretended to share his enthusiasm, all while her mind worked overtime, trying to figure out what to do. She considered her options constantly. She could refuse to go, but that might alert him that she was suspicious. She could confront him about the insurance policy, but what if that triggered him to act immediately? She could go to the police, but with what evidence? A legal insurance policy and her own paranoid suspicions? She was trapped in a nightmare of her own uncertainty, unable to trust the man she had married, but equally unable to prove he meant her harm. On Thursday evening, 3 days before the scheduled jump, Cassandra sat alone in their living room while Julius worked late at the office. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty, and her thoughts had nowhere to hide from themselves. She had barely slept in days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself falling through the sky, her parachute failing, Julius watching from above as she plummeted toward the earth. She had spent hours over the past few days researching skydiving accidents. The statistics were actually reassuring. Tandem jumps were remarkably safe, with failure rates so low they were almost negligible. But almost negligible was not the same as impossible. Parachutes could malfunction. Equipment could be tampered with. Accidents, however rare, did happen. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julius. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Love you." 2 words that used to fill her with warmth now felt like a threat wrapped in affection. She typed back a simple heart emoji, unable to form actual words. As soon as she hit send, a new thought struck her with such force that she actually gasped aloud. What if she was completely wrong about everything? The thought had been lurking at the edges of her consciousness for days, but she had been too frightened to examine it directly. What if there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for the insurance policy? What if Julius had taken it out as a responsible financial decision and simply forgotten to mention it? What if his 2 weeks of distance had been about work stress or family issues he did not want to burden her with? What if his subsequent romantic gestures were genuine attempts to reconnect after a difficult period? What if she was destroying her marriage over her own paranoia? Cassandra pressed her palms against. Her eyes, trying to stop the tears that threatened to fall. She had been so hurt by her first marriage, so damaged by that slow erosion of trust and intimacy. Maybe those old wounds had never really healed. Maybe she was seeing monsters where there were none, projecting her past trauma onto a man who had done nothing but love her. But then she remembered the insurance policy, $2 million, signed without her knowledge. That was not nothing. That was concrete, undeniable, and deeply unsettling regardless of intent. She needed to know the truth. She needed answers before Saturday, before she found herself 12,000 feet in the air, wondering if her husband had sabotaged her parachute. The not knowing was eating her alive from the inside out, turning every kind gesture into a potential manipulation, every loving word into a possible lie. Cassandra made a decision. Tomorrow, when Julius was at work, she would go to the skydiving facility. She would talk to the instructors, ask questions, maybe even inspect the equipment if they would let her. She did not know exactly what she was looking for, but she had to do something. Sitting in passive fear was no longer an option. That night, when Julius came home after midnight, she pretended to be asleep. She felt the bed dip as he climbed in beside her, felt his arm drape across her waist in the protective way he always held her. His breathing eventually settled into the deep rhythm of sleep, but Cassandra lay awake in the darkness, her eyes open, her mind spinning. The next morning, she called in sick to work, something she almost never did. Julius had already left for the office, his goodbye kiss on her forehead still tingling against her skin like an accusation or an apology. She could not decide which. As soon as his car pulled out of their apartment complex, she grabbed her purse and keys. The skydiving facility was about an hour outside the city, nestled in a rural area with wide-open fields perfect for landing. Cassandra had looked up the address days ago, but had not been sure until this moment whether she would actually go. The drive felt both endless and too short. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The facility itself was smaller than she expected. A modest building with a large hangar attached, and beyond that, a vast stretch of flat land marked with a target for landing. A small plane sat on a nearby runway. Everything looked professional and well-maintained, which should have been reassuring, but somehow was not. Cassandra walked into the main office, where a young woman with a cheerful smile sat behind a desk covered in clipboards and waiver forms. "Hi there," the woman said brightly. "Do you have a reservation? Or are you looking to book a jump?" "I have a reservation," Cassandra said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "For tomorrow. Under Wheeler." Julius Wheeler made the booking for both of us. The woman's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Ah, yes. Here you are. Julius and Cassandra Wheeler. Tandem jumps, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? You're all set. Did you need to reschedule?" "No, I just—" Cassandra hesitated, not sure how to phrase what she wanted without sounding insane. "I wanted to come by early and maybe meet our instructors, get familiar with the process. I'm a little nervous." "Oh, that's completely normal," the woman said warmly. "First time jumping?" "Yes." "Well, you're in great hands. Let me see who's assigned to you." She checked her computer again. "Looks like you'll be jumping with Marcus, and your husband will be with Ethan. They're both excellent instructors, very experienced. Actually, Marcus is here now if you want to meet him." Before Cassandra could respond, the woman called out toward the hangar, "Marcus, got a client here who wants to say hi before tomorrow's jump." A man in his early 50s appeared, wearing cargo pants and a faded t-shirt with the facility's logo. He had sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "You must be Cassandra Wheeler," he said, extending his hand. "I'll be your instructor tomorrow." Cassandra shook his hand, searching his face for any sign of conspiracy or deception. She found only professionalism and genuine friendliness. "I wanted to ask about the equipment," she said. "How does everything work? How do you know the parachutes are safe?" Marcus launched into a detailed explanation of their safety protocols. how every piece of equipment was inspected before each jump, how the parachutes were packed by certified riggers, how tandem rigs had not one but two parachutes, plus an automatic activation device that would deploy the reserve chute if the main one failed. He showed her the actual harness she would wear, walked her through the entire process from plane to landing. The truth is, Marcus said, tandem skydiving is incredibly safe. You're more likely to get hurt driving here than jumping out of our plane. We take safety very seriously. Every single jump, every single time. What about equipment failure? Cassandra asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Has it ever happened here? Not in the 15 years I've been working here, Marcus said, and I've done over 8,000 jumps. Equipment malfunctions are extremely rare, and when they do occur, that's why we have backup systems. Multiple redundancies. You're going to be fine, I promise. Cassandra wanted to ask more, wanted to ask if someone could tamper with a parachute, if an instructor could be bribed, if there were any scenarios where a jump could be made deliberately dangerous. But she could not form those questions without revealing her suspicions, without sounding paranoid or delusional. Can I request something? She asked instead, an idea forming. Would it be possible for you to personally check my equipment tomorrow morning? Right before we go up? I know you said everything's inspected, but I'd feel better if I could watch you check it one more time. Marcus smiled, not seeming offended by the request. Absolutely. I do that anyway as part of my routine, but I'll make sure you're right there with me so you can see everything. How's that? Thank you, Cassandra said, feeling a small measure of relief. That would really help. After leaving the facility, she sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time, her hands resting on the steering wheel, her mind churning. Marcus had seemed genuine. The facility seemed legitimate. The safety protocols seemed robust. Maybe she really was just being paranoid. Maybe tomorrow would go perfectly fine, and she would feel foolish for ever doubting Julius. Or maybe she had just ensured her own safety by requesting that last-minute equipment check. Maybe Julius's plan, if there even was a plan, had just been thwarted by her caution. She would not know until tomorrow. When she got home that afternoon, Julius was already there, which surprised her. Hey, he said when she walked in, I left work early. Wanted to spend the evening with you before our big adventure tomorrow. He moved toward her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Where were you? Her heart jumped. Just running errands, she said. Getting some things at the store. What things? The question was casual, but she sensed something underneath it. Suspicion? Curiosity? Or was she just projecting her own guilt? Just stuff. Boring stuff. She pulled away from his embrace, moving toward the kitchen. Are you hungry? I can make us an early dinner. They spent the evening in a strange dance of normalcy that felt anything but normal. Julius seemed determined to make everything perfect. He opened a bottle of wine, put on soft music, talked about how excited he was for tomorrow. Cassandra played along, smiling and nodding at all the right moments, while internally cataloging every word and gesture for hidden meaning. I'm really glad we're doing this together, Julius said at one point, reaching across the dinner table to take her hand. You mean everything to me, Cassandra. I hope you know that. She looked into his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had once made her feel safe, and she realized with a pang of deep sadness that she did not know anything anymore. She did not know if he loved her or wanted her dead. She did not know if tomorrow would be an adventure or an attempted murder. She did not know if the man sitting across from her was her soulmate or her killer. I know, she lied, squeezing his hand back. I love you too. That night, she could not sleep at all. She lay beside Julius in the darkness, listening to him breathe, counting down the hours until morning. Part of her wanted to wake him up and confront him, to demand the truth about the insurance policy, to force this horrible uncertainty to end one way or another. But a larger part of her was terrified of what that truth might be. At 3 a.m, she got up and went to the bathroom, closing the door quietly behind her. She stared at herself in the mirror, The same mirror where, months ago, she had looked at herself with hope in her eyes. The woman staring back at her now looked haunted, exhausted, terrified. She thought about her life, about everything that had led to this moment. The failed first marriage that had made her swear off love. The 7 years alone, where she had rebuilt herself. The chance meeting in a coffee shop that had changed everything. The fairy tale romance that had seemed too good to be true. And now this, standing in her bathroom at 3 in the morning, wondering if her husband was planning to kill her. How had it come to this? Tomorrow she would know. One way or another, tomorrow would bring answers. Either Julius was innocent and she had nearly destroyed her marriage with paranoid suspicions, or he was guilty and she was about to jump out of a plane with a man who wanted her dead. Cassandra returned to bed, slipping under the covers carefully so as not to wake Julius. In the darkness, she whispered a prayer to whoever might be listening, not for safety exactly, but for truth. Whatever was going to happen tomorrow, she just wanted to finally know the truth. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Dawn came eventually, pale light filtering through the curtains. Julius woke beside her, stretching and smiling. "Today's the day," he said, his voice full of excitement that made her stomach twist into knots. "Today's the day," she echoed, her voice hollow. They drove to the facility mostly in silence, Julius humming along to the radio, while Cassandra stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past. Her hands were shaking, so she kept them clasped tightly in her lap. When they arrived at the facility, Marcus was waiting for them with another instructor, a younger man with sandy blonde hair who introduced himself as Ethan. "You must be Julius," Ethan said, shaking his hand enthusiastically. "Ready for the jump of your life?" "Absolutely," Julius replied, and Cassandra noticed something in his voice, a tightness, a tension that did not match his enthusiastic words. She studied his face and saw something she had not noticed during the drive. He looked pale, and there was a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the cool morning air. "You okay?" she asked, before she could stop herself. Julius turned to her, and for just a moment, she saw something flash across his face. Fear? Guilt? Pain? It vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "I'm fine," he said. "Just excited." "Nervous excited, you know." They went through the orientation together, signing waiver forms that Cassandra read with unusual care, as if the legal language might reveal some hidden truth. Marcus and Ethan explained the process again, how they would be harnessed to their instructors, how the exit from the plane would work, what to expect during freefall, how to position their bodies for landing. Throughout the entire briefing, Cassandra kept glancing at Julius. He was quieter than usual, responding to questions with single words instead of his typical elaborate answers. His hands kept flexing and unflexing at his sides. Something was wrong with him. She could sense it the way you sense a storm coming before the first drop of rain falls. "All right," Marcus said, after they had finished the ground training. "Let's get you two suited up. Cassandra, I promised you could watch me check your equipment personally, right?" "Yes," she said quickly. "Thank you." Marcus led her to the equipment room where the parachute rigs hung on racks along the wall. He pulled down 2 tandem rigs, one for their jump together, and another that Ethan was already checking for Julius. Cassandra watched with intense focus as Marcus went through every strap, every buckle, every component of the parachute system. He explained each step, showing her the main chute, the reserve chute, the automatic activation device. "See this?" he said, pointing to a small computer attached to the rig. "This is programmed to deploy the reserve automatically if we're still in free fall below a certain altitude. It's completely independent of human control. Even if everything else failed, which it won't, this would save us. You're going to be completely safe, I promise." Cassandra nodded, feeling slightly reassured. Marcus's inspection was thorough and professional. Everything looked pristine, new, well-maintained. There was no sign of tampering. no indication that anything had been compromised. "What about his?" she asked. Gesturing toward the rig Ethan was preparing for Julius. The question came out more sharply than she intended. Ethan looked up, surprised. "Want me to show you this one too?" he asked good-naturedly. "Please," Cassandra said. Ethan walked her through Julius's equipment with the same level of detail Marcus had shown. Everything appeared perfect. Straps secure, parachutes properly packed, all systems functioning. Cassandra felt her suspicions beginning to crumble. She had been wrong. She had let her past trauma and her discovery of the insurance policy twist her perception of reality. Julius was not trying to kill her. He had planned this jump as an adventure, a bonding experience, exactly as he had said. She felt simultaneously relieved and ashamed. How could she have suspected him of something so horrible? How could she have spent the past week living in terror of the man who loved her? They boarded the small plane, Cassandra and Marcus, Julius and Ethan, along with 2 solo jumpers who would be going first. The plane was cramped, with bench seating along the sides and barely enough room to move. As they climbed toward jump altitude, the noise of the engine made conversation difficult. Cassandra found herself sitting across from Julius, their knees almost touching in the narrow space. She looked at him, really looked at him, and her breath caught. He was staring at her with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of love and anguish so profound it made her chest tighten. His eyes were glassy, as if he were fighting back tears. When he noticed her watching, he tried to smile, but it came out wrong, broken, like a grimace of pain. "Julius," she mouthed over the noise of the engine. He shook his head slightly, then looked away, out the small window where clouds drifted past like ghosts. His hands were gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles had gone white. She noticed his jaw was clenched, a muscle twitching near his temple. Whatever was happening inside him, it was clearly tearing him apart. The plane continued climbing, 12,000 feet. The solo jumpers moved toward the door, made their exits, and disappeared into the sky below. Then it was time for the tandem jumps. Marcus began securing Cassandra to his harness, checking each connection point twice. Across the plane, Ethan was doing the same with Julius. Cassandra's heart pounded as Marcus moved her toward the open door. The wind rushed in, deafening and cold. She could see the ground impossibly far below, patchwork fields and tiny roads that looked like toys. Fear gripped her. Not fear of Julius anymore, but the primal fear of jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. "Ready!" Marcus shouted in her ear. Before she could answer, she heard Julius's voice, barely audible over the wind and engine noise. "Wait!" Everyone turned. Julius was standing at the door opposite hers, still harnessed to Ethan, but he had gone rigid. His face had drained of all color. "Wait," he said again, louder this time. "Something's wrong. I can't." "You're okay, buddy," Ethan said calmly, with the practiced ease of someone who had talked nervous jumpers down before. "It's normal to be scared. Just take a breath. We'll go when you're ready." "No," Julius said, and his voice cracked. "No, you don't understand. Check the equipment. Check my rig. Please. Something feels wrong." Ethan frowned, but began going through the checklist again, checking each connection point on the harness. "Everything looks good, Julius. All the straps are secure. You're perfectly safe." "The parachute," Julius said desperately. "Check the parachute itself, please." Something in his tone made Ethan's professional demeanor shift. He motioned to Marcus to wait, then began a more thorough inspection of the rig. Cassandra watched, her body still half hanging out the door, as Ethan opened the container and examined the canopy packing. Ethan's face changed. "Marcus," he called out, his voice sharp, "we've got a problem." Marcus immediately pulled Cassandra back from the door and moved toward Ethan. The 2 instructors examined the parachute together, their expressions growing increasingly serious. They exchanged words Cassandra could not hear over the engine noise, but she could see the concern on their faces. "What is it?" she shouted. "What's wrong?" Marcus turned to the pilot. making a circling gesture with his finger, the signal to abort the jump and return to the ground. The plane began descending. In the cramped space, with the engine noise still roaring, Marcus leaned close to Cassandra's ear. "The main chute is packed wrong," he said. "It wouldn't have deployed properly. The reserve would have kicked in automatically, so he would have been fine. But it shouldn't have been packed incorrectly in the first place. I don't understand how this happened. We need to get down and figure this out." Cassandra felt the blood drain from her face. The main chute was packed wrong. Julius's chute, not hers, his. Her mind reeled, trying to process what this meant. She had been so convinced that Julius was planning to kill her that she had never considered the opposite possibility. She looked at him across the plain, and their eyes met. In that moment, she saw the truth written on his face as clearly as if he had spoken it aloud. He had known. Somehow, he had known his parachute was faulty. That was why he had seemed so terrified, so anguished. That was why he had insisted on checking the equipment at the last second. But how could he have known? Unless, the thought hit her like a physical blow, unless he had arranged it himself. Unless the faulty parachute was not an accident, but intentional. Unless Julius had not been planning to kill her at all, but to die himself, making it look like an accident so she could collect the insurance money. The plane touched down with a hard bounce on the runway. The moment they were on the ground, both instructors began disconnecting the tandem harnesses. Julius was already pulling away from Ethan, stumbling toward the hangar with his hands pressed to his face. Cassandra freed herself from Marcus's rig and ran after him. "Julius!" she called out. "Julius, wait!" He did not stop. He kept walking, faster now, almost running. She chased him into the hangar, around the corner into a small office space that was mercifully empty. When she finally caught up to him, she grabbed his arm and spun him around. He was crying. Tears streamed down his face, his whole body shaking with sobs he could no longer contain. "I'm sorry," he gasped out. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't." "What were you doing?" Cassandra demanded, though she already knew the answer. "The insurance policy, the parachute. Julius, what were you planning?" He sank down onto a chair, his head in his hands, his shoulders heaving. When he finally looked up at her, his face was a mask of devastation. "I'm dying," he said simply. "I'm dying, Cassandra, and I didn't know how to tell you." The words hung in the air between them, so heavy and impossible that Cassandra felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "What?" she whispered. "What are you talking about?" Julius wiped his face with trembling hands, trying to compose himself enough to speak. "8 weeks ago," he began, his voice raw and broken, "I went for my annual physical. Just routine blood work, nothing special. But the results came back abnormal. They ran more tests. More and more tests." He paused, struggling to continue. "They found something. A disease so rare that my doctor had to consult with specialists across the country to even confirm the diagnosis." Cassandra felt her legs give out. She sank onto the chair beside him, her hand reaching automatically for his. "What disease? Julius, what are you talking about? It doesn't even have a common name," he said, staring at their joined hands. "Just a long medical term I can barely pronounce. Dr. Ashford, he's the specialist. He told me there are only 9 documented cases in the entire world. 6 of those people are already dead. They all died suddenly, without warning. Their hearts just stopped." His voice cracked again. "Of the 3 people still alive, I'm one of them. The other 2 agreed to participate in experimental treatment studies. But Dr. Ashford was very clear. The chances are almost nothing. This disease moves fast. It's aggressive. It's fatal." Cassandra's mind was spinning, trying to process what he was saying. "When?" she managed to ask. "When did you find this out?" 8 weeks ago, he repeated. "Remember when I was distant for those 2 weeks? That was when I got the diagnosis. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except the fact that I was going to die and leave you. We had just gotten married. We were supposed to have our whole lives together, and suddenly I was being told I had months, maybe less. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The 2 weeks of cold distance, the sudden shift to excessive romance, the expensive trips and perfect memories, the insurance policy. "You were planning to die in the jump," Cassandra said, her voice barely audible. "You were going to make it look like an accident so I could have the insurance money." Julius nodded, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. "I couldn't bear the thought of you watching me waste away. I couldn't stand the idea of you spending our savings on treatments that wouldn't work, draining everything we had just to buy me a few more painful weeks. The insurance money, $2 million. It would be enough to take care of you, enough for you to rebuild your life after I was gone. I thought, if it looked like an accident, a tragic skydiving mishap, you wouldn't have to carry the weight of my illness. You could remember me healthy and happy, not dying in a hospital bed." "You were going to leave me," Cassandra said, anger suddenly flaring through her shock and grief. "You were going to kill yourself and leave me to believe it was an accident. Do you have any idea what that would have done to me?" "I know," Julius said miserably. "I know it was wrong, but I was terrified, Cassandra. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Not of dying. I made peace with that, but of leaving you, of hurting you, of not being able to protect you anymore." He turned to face her fully, gripping both her hands now. "Those 2 months after I decided, I spent every single day trying to give you enough love to last a lifetime. Every trip, every dinner, every moment, I was trying to create memories so perfect that maybe, somehow, they would sustain you after I was gone. I wanted you to remember being happy with me, not sad." Cassandra felt hot tears streaming down her own face now. "I found the insurance policy 3 days ago," she said. "I thought you were planning to kill me. I thought my husband was a murderer. I've spent the last 3 days terrified that you were going to sabotage my parachute." Julius's face crumpled. "Oh, God. Cassandra, no. I would never. How could you think?" Then understanding dawned. "Of course you thought that. Of course you did. I took out a secret life insurance policy and then suggested we go skydiving. What else were you supposed to think?" He pulled her into his arms, both of them crying now. "I'm so sorry. I've handled everything wrong. I should have told you from the beginning. I should have trusted you with the truth." They held each other in that small office, 2 people who had both been living in private hells for weeks, finally able to share the burden of truth. After a long moment, Cassandra pulled back enough to look at him. "What changed?" she asked. "Why did you stop? Why did you insist they check the equipment?" Julius laughed bitterly. "When we were sitting in that plane, I looked at you, and I realized what I was about to do. I was about to traumatize you in the worst possible way. You would have watched me fall. You would have seen me die. Even if you never knew it was intentional, that image would have haunted you forever. And I thought about your first marriage, about how hard you worked to trust again, and I realized that betraying that trust, even by dying, was worse than anything else I could do to you." He wiped his eyes. "So I panicked. I made them check the equipment because I suddenly didn't want to die. I wanted every possible extra day with you, no matter how hard it would be. The parachute," Cassandra said slowly. "You sabotaged it yourself." "I paid someone," Julius admitted, "a rigger who works at a different facility. I gave him $5,000 to pack the main chute incorrectly, but make it look like an accident. The reserve would have deployed automatically, but not soon enough. At least, that's what he promised me." He shook his head. "It seemed foolproof when I was drowning in despair and terror. Now, it just seems insane." Cassandra stood abruptly, pacing the small office. "So what now?" she demanded. "You're just going to die? We're just going to accept this? There has to be something we can do. Other doctors, other treatments, experimental trials? I've looked into everything," Julius said wearily. "Dr. Ashford has connections with the best medical institutions in the country. There's nothing. This disease is too rare, too poorly understood. The two people in the treatment trials, they're basically guinea pigs for research that might help people decades from now. It won't help me. Then we'll be guinea pigs too, Cassandra said fiercely. We'll try everything. I don't care if the odds are 1 in a million. We're trying. Julius looked at her with such profound sadness that it broke her heart. Cassandra, I can't ask you to watch me die slowly. I can't put you through that. You're not asking, she said. I'm choosing. You don't get to make decisions about my life without me. You don't get to decide what I can or can't handle. We're married, Julius. That means we face things together, even the impossible things, especially the impossible things. They talked for hours in that small office, Marcus and Ethan eventually checking on them but giving them space when they realized something significant was happening. Julius told her everything. The details of his diagnosis, the prognosis Dr. Ashford had given him, the symptoms he had not yet developed but would. Cassandra listened to all of it, absorbing the medical terminology and grim statistics, refusing to let the weight of it crush her. As the afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, Cassandra brought up something that had been weighing on her heart. I want to have a baby, she said quietly. Julius's head snapped up. What? No. Cassandra? No. I'm not leaving you alone to raise a child. I'm not doing that to you or to an innocent kid who would grow up without a father. Is it genetic? She asked. The disease? Can you pass it to a child? I don't know, Julius admitted. Dr. Ashford said there's not enough research to know for certain. Then we find out, Cassandra said firmly. We ask. We test. Because if it's not genetic, if there's no risk to a child, then I want your baby, Julius. I want a piece of you that will continue after you're gone. I want to create life with you while we still can. It's not fair to the child, Julius protested, but his voice lacked conviction. She could see the longing in his eyes, the desperate desire for legacy, for continuity, for meaning in the face of mortality. Life isn't fair, Cassandra said, but love is worth it anyway. A child who's loved for whatever time you have is better than no child at all. Please, Julius, don't take this away from us, too. They argued about it over the following days, a back and forth that was really both of them processing grief and fear and desperate hope. Finally, Julius agreed to ask Dr. Ashford about the genetic component of the disease. They scheduled an appointment to discuss it, though Julius warned her repeatedly not to get her hopes up. The appointment was set for a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after the aborted skydiving attempt. They spent those 2 weeks in a strange new normal, living with the truth of Julius's diagnosis out in the open, making the most of every day while also drowning in the weight of knowing those days were numbered. Cassandra took a leave of absence from work. They stopped pretending everything was fine and started being honest about how terrifying and unfair and horrible everything was. On Monday evening, the night before their appointment with Dr. Ashford, Julius's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Dr. Ashford's office, he said. That's weird. Why would they call the night before? He answered the phone, and Cassandra watched as his face went pale. What? He said. Are you sure? When? A long pause. Yes, we'll be there. Tomorrow morning? Yes, we can do that. Thank you. Thank you for calling. He hung up and just stared at Cassandra, his expression unreadable. What is it? She asked, her heart racing. Is it bad news? Julius, what did they say? Dr. Ashford wants to see us first thing tomorrow morning, Julius said slowly. He said it's urgent. He said, his voice broke. He said there's been a development in one of the other cases, one of the people in the experimental treatment trial. They barely slept that night, both of them lying awake, imagining every possible scenario. When morning finally came, they drove to Dr. Ashford's office in tense silence. The waiting room felt like purgatory, every minute stretching into an eternity. Finally, a nurse called them back. Dr. Ashford was waiting in his office, and when Julius and Cassandra entered, they saw that his eyes were red, as if he had been crying. Cassandra's heart sank. This was bad news. This was the worst news. But then Dr. Ashford smiled, a huge, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. He stood up from behind his desk and walked around it, pulling Julius into an embrace that seemed highly unprofessional and deeply human all at once. "Julius," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Cassandra, I called you in early because I couldn't wait to tell you. I've been up all night reviewing the data, consulting with colleagues, trying to make sure I wasn't misreading the results." He pulled back, gripping Julius's shoulders. "One of the patients in the experimental trial, a woman named Rebecca, she's in complete remission. Complete. The disease is gone." The words didn't make sense at first. Cassandra heard them, but they seemed to be in a foreign language. Julius stood frozen, not reacting, barely breathing. "What?" Cassandra finally managed to whisper. Dr. Ashford was crying now, openly weeping as he spoke. "The treatment worked. We don't fully understand how or why yet, but it worked." Rebecca was on an experimental combination of therapies: immunotherapy, targeted radiation, and a new drug that's still in clinical trials. 3 weeks ago, her symptoms began improving. Last week, we ran comprehensive tests. He paused, seemingly overwhelmed by his own words. "There's no trace of the disease in her system. None. She's in complete remission." Julius made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "What does that mean? For me? Is there a chance?" "We can start you on the same treatment protocol immediately," Dr. Ashford said. "I won't lie to you. Rebecca is the first success we've seen, and we don't have long-term data yet. But for the first time since I've been studying this disease, I have hope. Real hope. You might actually survive this, Julius." Julius collapsed into a chair, his whole body shaking. Cassandra knelt beside him, her arms around him, both of them crying so hard they could barely breathe. After 8 weeks of living under a death sentence, after planning his own death, after resigning himself to leaving behind everything he loved, suddenly there was hope. A small, fragile, precious hope, but hope nonetheless. "There's more," Dr. Ashford said gently. "You asked me to look into the genetic component of the disease for family planning purposes." He pulled out a file. "I have those results. The disease is not hereditary. If you and Cassandra want to have children, there's no risk of passing this condition to them." Cassandra looked at Julius and saw joy break through the tears on his face. "We can have a baby," he said wonderingly. "Even if the treatment doesn't work, even if I don't make it, you can have our baby." "You're going to make it," Cassandra said fiercely. "You're going to live, and we're going to have this baby together, and you're going to be there for all of it." The treatment began the following week. It was brutal. Long days at the hospital, medications that made Julius violently ill, procedures that left him exhausted and weak. But through all of it, Cassandra was beside him. They had honest conversations about fear and death and hope. They made plans for the future while also acknowledging that the future was uncertain. They learned to exist in the space between despair and optimism, finding moments of joy even in the hardest days. 6 months into treatment, Julius's symptoms began to improve. The fatigue that had been creeping up on him started to recede. His test results showed the disease markers decreasing. Dr. Ashford was cautiously optimistic, using words like promising and encouraging, but refusing to make definitive pronouncements. 1 year after Julius's diagnosis, after months of treatment and countless tests, Dr. Ashford made it official. Julius was in complete remission. The disease was undetectable in his system. He would need to be monitored closely for years to come. But for now, he was healthy. He was going to live. 2 years after that terrible day in the skydiving facility, on a warm Saturday afternoon in early summer, Julius Wheeler sat on a blanket in a public park. The sun was warm on his face, and the smell of cut grass and blooming flowers filled the air. Beside him, Cassandra was laughing, her auburn hair catching the light exactly as it had the first day he saw her in that coffee shop years ago. Between them, taking unsteady toddler steps across the blanket, was their daughter. Lily was 18 months old, with Julius's dark hair and Cassandra's green eyes. She stumbled toward her father, squealing with delight, and Julius caught her, lifting her high in the air while she giggled. The sound of her laughter was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. "Again, Daddy?" Lily demanded in her limited vocabulary. "Again!" Julius obliged, spinning her gently while she shrieked with joy. When he finally set her down, she immediately toddled off toward a nearby flower, pointing and babbling about pretty. Cassandra leaned her head on Julius's shoulder. "Do you remember that day at the skydiving place?" she asked quietly. "When you almost—" "Every day," Julius said. "I think about it every single day." "I'm glad you changed your mind," Cassandra said. "I'm glad you decided to live." Julius kissed the top of her head, watching as Lily discovered a ladybug on a blade of grass. "I didn't just decide to live," he said. "I decided to trust that life with you, however long or short it might be, was worth every moment of fear and pain and uncertainty. You taught me that, you and Lily." Cassandra looked up at him, and he saw tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears. "We almost missed all of this," she said. "If things had gone differently that day—" "But they didn't," Julius interrupted gently. "That's the miracle, isn't it? Not just that the treatment worked, not just that I'm healthy now, but that we found our way back to trust, that we learned to face impossible things together, that we chose hope even when hope seemed foolish." Lily toddled back to them, holding the ladybug carefully in her small hands. "Bug, Mama," she announced proudly. "Pretty bug." "Very pretty, sweetheart," Cassandra said, helping her examine the insect before it flew away. Julius watched his wife and daughter together. This family he had almost never had. This life he had almost thrown away. He thought about the insurance policy that was now just paperwork, in a file somewhere, unused and unnecessary. He thought about the faulty parachute that had never opened, the death that had never happened. He thought about all the ways the story could have ended, and the miracle that it had ended this way instead. The sun moved lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Other families played nearby, their laughter and conversations creating a symphony of ordinary joy. Julius lay back on the blanket, Lily curled against his chest, Cassandra's hand in his, and felt completely, impossibly, miraculously content. "I love you," he said, to both of them, to the universe, to whatever force had decided to give him this second chance at life. "We love you too," Cassandra replied, and in her voice was everything. All the fear they had survived, all the hope they had clung to, all the love that had carried them through the impossible. Lily yawned, her small body relaxing into sleep against her father's chest. Julius wrapped his arms around her, feeling her heartbeat against his, steady and strong and alive. His own heart beat in response, healthy and whole, no longer counting down to an ending, but instead beating out the rhythm of a future he had never expected to have. In that park, on that perfect summer afternoon, surrounded by the family he had almost lost and the life he had almost ended, Julius Wheeler understood what Cassandra had tried to tell him 2 years ago, that love, messy, terrifying, unpredictable love, was always worth the risk. That hope, even against impossible odds, was never foolish. That choosing to live, to trust, to believe in tomorrow, was the bravest thing any person could do. The shadows grew longer, the air cooled, and eventually they packed up their things and headed home. Lily asleep in Julius's arms, Cassandra walking beside him. As they walked, Julius glanced back at the park one last time, at the spot where they had spent the afternoon, and he silently thanked whatever power had intervened that day in the airplane Whatever instinct had made him ask them to check the parachute, whatever miracle had brought him to this moment, he was alive. His family was healthy. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility. And for Julius and Cassandra Wheeler, after everything they had survived, that was not just enough. It was everything. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.